My name is Thomas. I'm 68. I worked in regional finance for over 40 years before retiring 7 winters ago. It was early December when I called Aaron. I don't keep a strict calendar anymore, but I still notice the way the light shifts. That's how I knew it was time. I've never been the sort of father who shows up unannounced or expects traditions to continue out of habit, but I've always made the call, the just checking kind. He picked up on the third ring. Background noise, not loud, but busy. I imagined he was at home. His voice was pleasant, if slightly distant. I asked how things were going. He mentioned work. I said I'd been walking more, just to keep the blood moving. He laughed politely. Then I asked, have you and Kayla figured out Christmas plans yet? There was a short pause, not awkward, just real. The kind where someone's thoughts are trying to rearrange themselves faster than their mouth can catch up. Oh, we figured you wouldn't be coming this year, he said. Didn't want you to feel pressured. Flights are rough this time of year, right? I didn't respond right away. Not because I was hurt, not yet, but because I was still organizing what that meant. I hadn't said anything about not coming. Hadn't hinted at it. But somewhere along the way, a decision had been made for me. No problem, I said, calmly. I was just checking in. We'll definitely do something in January, he added, quickly. Something quieter. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. That sounds good. We ended the call like people who know each other well but don't talk enough to realize when that stopped being true. I looked out the kitchen window for a while afterward. There was a crow on the fence. I remember thinking that bird shows up more regularly than I do. I don't believe in confronting people just to be heard. I've always found that the real shifts happen quietly. When someone stops checking the porch light. Stops setting out an extra plate. Stops asking if you're coming before assuming you're not. It wasn't a fight. That's what struck me most. It was just omission. The kind that accumulates until you're no longer on the list of people anyone remembers to loop in. When Aaron was younger, he used to call every Sunday night. Just to tell me something small. A new recipe Kayla tried. Something the dog did. I'd never asked for that. It just happened. Slowly, those calls became texts. Then the texts became delayed replies. Now they don't arrive unless I send the first one. I don't blame him. I've always told myself that. People grow. They get absorbed into new ecosystems. Wives. Jobs. Families. I was never interested in clinging to someone who needed to stretch. But there's a difference between letting go and being left behind. That night, I opened the cabinet where I keep old documents. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wanted to remind myself what I'd signed over, what remained in my name. Not out of bitterness. Just curiosity. I found the mortgage file under, for Aaron. Still co-signed. Still quietly maintained. I closed the cabinet, turned off the light, and made a cup of tea I didn't finish. It was a small moment. But it was the one where I realized I'd stopped being expected. I hadn't looked at those papers in years. Back then, it felt like the natural thing to do, help him get started. They'd found the place after 6 months of searching. A quiet neighborhood, just far enough outside the city to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that work and errands wouldn't become burdens. He was 30 then. Still full of the kind of ambition that makes people believe in permanence. Kayla had done most of the talking during that process. She knew what she wanted. Granite counters, open plan, room for kids. Aaron mostly nodded, smiling when she pointed at things. I could tell he trusted her eye. I trusted his gut. When they called to say the financing wasn't going through, I didn't hesitate. I signed. Paid the down payment directly. Stayed on the loan, just to give them better terms. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't a gift either. Just a father stepping in. That was 9 years ago. Since then, I never brought it up. Not once. Not even when they renovated the kitchen or replaced the back fence. I paid my part for the first year, insurance, taxes, and then, once they got on their feet, they took over. Quietly, I let it recede into the background. I didn't want to hang over them. But this time, when I pulled out the folder, something shifted. Not out of resentment. More like inventory. A sense of needing to understand where I stood, legally, not emotionally. My name was still on the title. My signature still beneath theirs. Joint liability. Shared ownership. Forgotten, maybe, but not erased. I called the bank, not to raise alarms, just to ask for a current statement. The woman on the line was polite, maybe mid-20s, didn't know who I was but confirmed everything I already suspected. The mortgage was still active, still under both names. Payments had been steady, but minimal. No refinancing. No removal of my name. I thanked her and hung up. It's a strange thing, realizing how much you're still tied to something no one talks about anymore. That house was meant to be theirs, and in all practical ways, it has been. I've never stepped foot inside it since the first Christmas they hosted, 5 years ago. After that, they always had reasons. Too much going on. New Year's would be better. Maybe summer. But the house I helped them into, it became something else. A monument to support offered quietly, then forgotten just as quietly. They live there. They build their life there. And I remain a line on a contract no one sees. I sat with that for a long time. Not angrily. Just, fully. What does it mean to be left out of something you helped build? Not locked out, that would at least require confrontation. But just quietly. Gradually, omitted. It was never about repayment. I never wanted recognition. But now, I started thinking less about what I gave and more about what they assumed would always remain. My support. My presence. My willingness to step in, even uninvited. And I wondered, if I'd never called this December, would they have even noticed I wasn't coming? Or had they already rewritten the story to no longer include me at all? I closed the folder and slid it back into the cabinet. But I didn't lock it. I left it sitting near the top. Easy to reach, if needed. It's easier to notice something's missing when it disappears all at once. But when it leaves slowly, in pieces, across seasons, it takes longer to name. You just wake up one day and realize the quiet has a shape. I started tracing it back, not to punish myself, but to make sense of the gaps. The last birthday card I received from them was 3 years ago. It had both their names on it, but I could tell it was Kayla who'd picked it out. She has a way with sentiment that reads more like performance than warmth. I didn't mind. I kept it anyway. It's in the drawer with the others. Last Thanksgiving, I'd offered to bring dessert. Kayla had said they were trying to keep it simple this year. Just a few friends. Nothing formal. I told them I understood. And I did, mostly. But I remember putting the pie back in the fridge and not touching it for days. Even now, I can't say why I didn't just eat it myself. Aaron used to be different. He was the one who called from the grocery store just to ask which brand of olive oil I used. He'd check in before long drives. There was a rhythm to our conversations, even when they were brief. Lately, the rhythm is gone. Now it's just short texts with long gaps between them. A thumbs up instead of words. We'll call later, that never comes. It isn't neglect in the obvious sense. They don't forget my name. They ask if I'm feeling well, when prompted. But the core of it, that sense of being held in someone's mind with intention, that's vanished. And when I try to understand why, I keep coming back to Kayla. She's not cruel. I don't believe that. But she's curated the way their life runs, and Aaron seems to follow it without protest. She manages the calendar, the invitations, the tone of conversations. She sets the table, so to speak, and I think at some point, she decided I didn't quite fit with the decor. It was subtle. No arguments. Just a shift in phrasing. We'll be out of town. It might be too hectic for visitors. Let's keep things low-key this year. Every phrase carried the same undercurrent, you're not needed here, but let's not make it personal. Maybe Aaron doesn't notice. Or maybe he notices and doesn't want to disrupt the peace of his home. I understand that. Truly. But I also know what it feels like to be passively excluded, not because of something I did, but because I don't serve a clear function anymore. That's the hard part about aging. You stop being necessary in visible ways, and the invisible ones get taken for granted. You become background. A voice on a voicemail they'll get to later. A name on a mortgage that no one talks about. I don't blame either of them outright. I've learned that blame is rarely useful. But I do allow myself to notice now. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Because noticing is the first step to choosing what I allow to continue. This didn't happen all at once. But it's happened. And I won't keep pretending it hasn't just because it's more comfortable for them if I don't speak it aloud. I may not say anything yet. But I've started listening to what the silence is telling me. There's a kind of peace in paperwork. It doesn't change its tone when you open it. It doesn't avoid you. It doesn't explain things away with a smile. It just sits there, waiting to be looked at, waiting to tell the truth. I started with the bank. Not the one I use for groceries or bills, but the one tied to the bigger things. The account I opened years ago for long-term decisions. I spoke with a woman named Linda, kind voice, efficient. She pulled up the information without hesitation, confirmed the mortgage was still jointly held. My name, still there. The liability, still shared. She mentioned the payments had been consistent. Minimums, no extra toward principal. They've been steady, she said. I said I wasn't worried. And I wasn't, not in the traditional sense. But steady doesn't mean thoughtful. It just means routine. I didn't tell her what I was really checking for. I didn't need to. This wasn't about pulling strings. It was about knowing which ones were still attached. After that, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of files. Old, but organized. My will, my pension plan, my life insurance. I reviewed them the way I used to review quarterly budgets, not emotionally, but thoroughly. Kayla's name wasn't anywhere in those documents. Aaron's was. Listed as executor. Listed as beneficiary. Chosen, not by default, but by trust. That mattered to me when I made those choices. It still does, but differently now. Some lines had started to blur over the years. Like the car I loaned him during that rough patch 2 summers ago. It was meant to be temporary, just until they figured things out. But it never made its way back to my driveway, and I never asked for it. A silent handoff that slowly became permanent. I started writing things down. Not in anger. In detail. A list of what I've contributed, what I still hold claim to, what has gone unspoken. The numbers aren't small. Down payments, insurance policies, legal co-signatures. Things that don't get brought up during birthday calls, if those still happened. The more I listed, the more something settled inside me. Not resentment. Not regret. Just recognition. Of how many pieces of their life still had my name beneath them. Even if they no longer said it aloud. Aaron doesn't know I've done this. He doesn't need to. It's not a threat. It's a record. A way of remembering that I was never peripheral, even if I've been treated like I drifted there. And maybe it sounds strange, that a father would need to do this at all. That he'd feel the need to take stock of what he's still tied to. But I've learned something: when you're no longer invited in, it's worth checking what you're still holding up from outside. I haven't decided what I'll do with the information. That's not what this chapter is about. For now, I'm just collecting facts. Quietly. Precisely. The way I used to audit someone else's accounts, except this time, the numbers are mine. And I'm not trying to balance the books. Just finally reading them. I didn't want to act on a feeling alone. There's always risk in mistaking disappointment for insight. So before I did anything, I sent the simplest message I could write. Let me know if you need anything this month. No weight to it. No urgency. Just a quiet offer, the way you might slide a note under a door and wait. I'd debated phrasing, whether to say money outright or keep it open-ended. I decided on gentle ambiguity. Not because I was being coy, but because I wanted to see how they would read it. 2 days passed. Then the reply came, mid-afternoon. All good here, Dad. Hope you're doing okay. That was it. No question about Christmas. No mention of the message's intent. No warmth, really, just a polite deflection. The kind of message you send to someone who still exists in your phone but not in your plans. I read it once, then again. Not to mine it for hidden meaning, there wasn't any, but to absorb what it confirmed. This wasn't oversight. It was habit. A new rhythm, settled quietly into place, where I existed on the outer edge of their lives, acknowledged, but uninvited. There's something strange about realizing your offers are being received more like weather updates, something to be nodded at and set aside. I don't think Aaron meant anything unkind by it. I believe, in his mind, he responded. He checked the box. But what that response told me, more clearly than anything else so far, is that I've become a symbol. A placeholder. The dependable figure who doesn't need to be factored in unless something goes wrong. And I've played that role willingly for years. I've shown up when asked. Stayed quiet when it was easier for them. Carried weight without calling attention to it. But that message, that one message, clarified something I hadn't been ready to name before. They didn't need me. At least, not in the ways I thought mattered. So I made a decision. Calmly. Not out of pain. Not as a warning. I logged into the bank portal and scheduled the stop payment on the mortgage, starting next month. It wasn't vindictive. If anything, it felt like balance, not in the moral sense, but in the practical one. They've built a life that no longer includes me in its active architecture. That's their right. But this, too, is mine, the right to remove my presence from places where I've been silently edited out. I didn't send a message afterward. I didn't announce it. I've never believed in making statements just for the sake of being noticed. If they reach out, if it matters, the system will tell them before I ever need to. And if it doesn't matter? Then I suppose I'll finally know where I stand, in terms more exact than any conversation could provide. It's not anger that sits with me now. It's something simpler. Something quieter. The shift from offering yourself out of hope, to withdrawing out of understanding. Not retreat, just realignment. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is accept what's already true. January was quiet. I didn't expect anything different. I read more than usual, made my own meals, and kept the house at a temperature I liked, not worrying if anyone else found it too warm or too cold. Christmas had passed like a light snow that never stuck, pleasant, forgettable, and gone. The morning his name lit up my phone, I was rinsing out the coffee pot. I let it ring once before I picked up. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice a bit more alert than usual. "Quick question, did something happen with the mortgage?" I dried my hands slowly. Yes, I said. I cancelled the payment. There was a beat of silence, not long, but long enough for me to feel it land. I could hear him reorienting. Oh. Okay, we got a notice. I wasn't sure if it was a bank error or something else. It wasn't a mistake, I said. You told me you weren't expecting me for Christmas. So I figured you weren't expecting me in other ways either. I assumed I wasn't needed. Another pause. Then, lightly, as if to keep it casual, he said, right. Yeah. I mean, we'll figure it out. I know you will, I replied. I didn't say it to be cold. I said it because I meant it. They're capable. He's capable. But somewhere along the way, my role had been reduced to a formality, a recurring transaction, conveniently timed. I had offered help when it felt like I was being invited into something. But now it felt like I was funding something I wasn't part of. That wasn't anger. That was math. He exhaled on the other end, probably expecting more. But I had nothing else to add. All right, he finally said. Well, thanks for the heads up. There was no edge in his tone. Maybe a little uncertainty. Maybe something else, recognition, maybe. I didn't chase it. Of course, I said. Take care of yourselves. You too, Dad. We ended the call without ceremony. Afterward, I sat back down with my coffee, which had gone tepid. The house was quiet again, but not empty. It felt steadier somehow, like a book finally closed after the last sentence had been read. That conversation wasn't a confrontation. It was a moment of clarity that had been building for months, maybe years. I'd spent so long trying to stay connected through gestures, money, favors, small messages, that I hadn't noticed how much the core had thinned out. And when he said, "We'll figure it out," I believed him. That's what made the decision feel right. If he had panicked, or pleaded, or tried to guilt me, maybe I would have felt different. But he didn't. He accepted it. Which meant some part of him already understood this was coming. That our relationship had shifted. There's a kind of peace in being honest. Not the brutal kind people use to hurt each other, but the quiet kind that removes pretense. I wasn't angry. I didn't want to punish him. I just wanted to stop showing up in ways that weren't being seen. I finished my coffee cold. Then I got up and checked the mail. A utility bill, a coupon envelope, and a charity flyer addressed to current resident. It felt about right. He asked if we could meet somewhere neutral. No house, no office, no pretense. Just a restaurant halfway between us, early lunch on a Thursday. He picked the place, quiet, unremarkable, with laminated menus and an automatic door that stuck halfway open. I arrived a few minutes early and waited. When he walked in, he looked older than I remembered. Not in his face, but in his posture. He saw me, raised a hand in a loose greeting, and sat down across from me without saying much. We ordered sandwiches, coffee. Something habitual. He made small talk at first. Work had slowed down, the twins were adjusting to their new routine, Ellie was looking at preschools already. He didn't mention the mortgage, and I didn't bring it up. I just listened. Let the words land where they wanted. After a while, he looked down at his napkin, then up again. We got things sorted, he said. With the payment. It was, a little tighter than I expected, but manageable. I nodded once, not as a question. He hesitated, then added, I didn't realize it had been coming from you this whole time. Ellie thought, well, we both assumed it was from the family account. I took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. I wasn't hiding it, I said, calm but firm. I just didn't think it needed to be a conversation. You were building your life, and I didn't want to be in the way. His face shifted, just slightly. A small crease at the brow. He wasn't defensive, not exactly, but there was discomfort there. The kind that comes from realizing you've overlooked something basic. I think I took that for granted, he said finally. You always handled things, even when we didn't talk about it. There was a quiet sincerity in his tone, but also a caution. He wasn't quite apologizing, not yet. More like circling it. I didn't stop because I was angry, I told him. I stopped because it became clear I wasn't expected. And I've spent too many years mistaking silence for permission. He looked away then, just for a second. A small reflex. I could see him thinking, not reacting, not pushing back, just thinking. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't dramatic. No emphasis. Just a low, quiet sentence between two men who knew each other well enough to feel when a line had shifted. I gave a slow nod. I accept that, I said. But I'm not going to start fixing things again just because you're uncomfortable now. That part of our dynamic is over. He didn't answer right away. I think he wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. Maybe he knew it wouldn't help. Maybe he knew it wasn't about punishment. We finished lunch mostly in silence. There was no outburst, no forced resolution. Just a quiet understanding settling in. He paid the check. Said thank you. And as we stood up to leave, he looked at me like he was seeing something he hadn't really looked at before. Not disappointment. Not resentment. Just recognition. And that was enough. He asked again about the mortgage a few days after our lunch. This time over text, something short, polite, but thinly veiled. Hey, just checking if we're still paused on the house payment or if there's a plan to revisit that. I didn't answer immediately. I let it sit for a day, then two. Not to punish him, but because I didn't want to respond out of habit. I read the message again on the third day, sitting at the dining table where I'd once mailed his college applications, and realized I had no desire to resume the old dynamic. So I called. No small talk. No second guessing. I've decided not to reinstate the payments, I said. But I'd be willing to cover the legal costs if you want the mortgage fully transferred to your name. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to tell me he hadn't expected that kind of finality. Okay, he said. Then quieter, are you sure? I am. It's a clean break. You'll have full ownership. I think that's better for both of us. He didn't argue. Maybe he was relieved. Maybe he wasn't sure how to fight something that sounded like generosity but didn't offer control. The call ended without tension, just a strange kind of quiet, the kind that follows clarity, even when it's not comforting. The paperwork took a few weeks. I paid the fees, signed where I needed to, stayed out of the way otherwise. He handled most of it on his own. That was the point, really. We didn't talk much during that time. A few logistical messages, nothing personal. But then, out of nowhere, he asked if I wanted to come by for dinner. Just him and Lila, no big gathering. I said yes, mostly out of curiosity. I wasn't expecting a warm reconciliation or a heartfelt confession. And I didn't get one. But he was present. Not rushed. Not distracted. He asked how I was doing, and waited for the answer. Lila told me about her new school project. She looked at me while she spoke. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, just attentiveness. Something I hadn't felt from either of them in a while. Over the next few months, it became a rhythm. He'd invite me, and I'd show up. Sometimes it was just coffee. Sometimes I'd stay for a meal. He never asked about money again. I noticed other changes, small ones. He'd call on a random Tuesday, not for anything urgent, just to talk. Once, he sent me a photo of a bookshelf he finally fixed, something I'd been nagging him to do for years. It wasn't performative. It felt like effort. And I appreciated it. But I didn't lean in too far. I answered when he reached out. I visited when I was invited. But I didn't offer more than that. No surprise gifts. No bailouts. No quiet sacrifices just to keep a sense of closeness alive. That kind of giving had cost me too much already. And I learned something in the stillness that followed all of this. Letting go isn't a dramatic act. It's restraint. It's choosing silence when the old reflex would have been to fix, to save, to stretch yourself thin for someone who doesn't even see it happening. I don't regret helping him get the house. I don't regret stepping back, either. The door's still open. But I don't stand in it anymore, waiting. That's how we end, I suppose, not with distance for punishment, but distance for peace.